Good evening, everyone. I am Ravi Gupta. I am editor-in-chief of a magazine called eGov, which is a 15-year-old magazine and India's first and Asia's first magazine on e-governance. And after 15 years, still this is India's and Asia's first and the only magazine on e-governance. And we have been focusing on innovations in governance and looking at what are the new ideas which uh, impact the governance ecosystems. So today, in this context, we have our speaker, Sri Rajesh Kankipati. He is an IS officer and he is collector and district magistrate of Surendranagar district, Gujarat. And today, the topic of this discussion is redefined role of state in the post-COVID world. And the context is that in the COVID situation, when the lockdown happened, the private sector was almost uh, uh, stuck. It was closed, except few of the essential services. And the role of the government sector increased dramatically. And so the role of state in the lives of a citizen have dramatically increased, dramatically changed in the COVID situation. So, in this situation, what is the redefined role of the state? We are going to discuss. So, welcome, Rajesh Ji. Thanks for joining us here with us. Rajesh Ji, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gupta.
Thank you. So,
thank you, Mr. Gupta.
Yes, welcome, Rajesh Ji. So, if you, Rajesh Ji, my first initial question to you is that how has been the role of state in the historical context and how it has evolved in the situation of COVID, if you can talk about it.
Yes, thank you. First, let me start by complimenting ELETS for doing this wonderful webinar and trying to spread knowledge in times of lockdown, which is something great. Secondly, I want to say to all viewers across nations watching this program that it is very safe for a newborn baby to drink the milk of the mother fed by breast. Don't have any apprehensions. I just want to start with this, that it is very safe to drink breast milk even if the mother is COVID positive. With that, I will get into this topic of the redefined role of state. Now, since generations and since millennia, the one question, if I have to put to anyone, the greatest ever invention that has taken place in the history of mankind, many can think it as the invention, say, of a printing press. Somebody can talk about telescope. Somebody can talk about the invention of steam engine. So many thoughts can emerge. But I feel the greatest invention that had ever taken place is the evolution of a welfare state. Imagine life without a state. It's impossible. Although we think it is markets that basically rule over us, but imagining life without state, a simple example, when flood comes, when earthquake comes, when disasters happen, and as in COVID pandemic that we have seen, people look towards government and the preeminent role of the state is seen in this fashion. Now, the general definition of a state says state has a territory. So say for example, we take India, we have a territory starting from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and Dwarka to Arunachal Pradesh. The territory has some people like you and me, and the people and this territory are governed by a government, which in case is the federal government at the union level and the state government at the provincial level. And this government is sovereign. This is typically the general definition of a state. But I want to stretch the sides of the square and make it into a rhombus. And I want to say you that the great definition provided by the scholar Max Weber, Max Weber said it is state. The only entity that can legally use force is state. So state has this preeminent role again. So that is why if a police comes and hits you, you don't question it back. Rather, you first think, did I commit a mistake? When a police comes and fines you, because it is ordained by the state, we pay fine because we recognize that it is only state that can legally use force. So there are various definitions of states. Some people felt it is best not to define state. Some people felt it is a conceptual morass to define state because state has lot of definitions. But during the Industrial Revolution and after the post-World Wars, we felt that the business of the government is not to be in business. And that was the time when market forces started getting a bigger share in the economic activity. And we believed that it is market that can drive the growth of a nation, which is economic growth of a nation. Now, but I want to show some other perspective. What Francis Fukuyama says. Francis Fukuyama says that the greatest problems and the biggest problems of the 21st century are neither acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which is HIV or AIDS, nor terrorism, nor nuclear weapons, but it is the problem and the existence of failed states or failing states. So Pakistan today has nuclear weapons. That per se may not be the problem. But the person ruling Pakistan or the person ruling Iran, the kind of government, the kind of state that is existing in these countries pose a bigger threat than the nuclear weapon per se. Today, the countries in Africa are not able to fight diseases like malaria, filaria, even cholera because of weak states. And it is in that context I see state across two axes. One is the strength of the state, the other is the scope of the state. Scope of the state defines what can state do. Can state produce bread? Can state run hotels? Or should state run power companies? Or should state do only policing, defending borders of the nation, and regulating the economy? That is the scope of the state. The next parameter shall be the strength of the state. In doing this work, assume I am producing bread, or I am running an hotel, or I am defending my borders, or I am regulating the market. What is the strength of the state? Now, when market has come in as a player, earlier we had a monopoly. Say, for example, the mobile phones. We had only BSNL. We had a STD call. People had to book calls. So only there was one player. There was monopoly. And because of monopoly, there was no competition. Because of no competition, no new technology came in. And because of that, the service delivery was poor. But when Manmohan Singh opened the economy in 1991, when the waves of liberalization, privatization, and globalization came in, we as citizens also witnessed a new phenomena of being a customer, the citizen and a customer. So now, when I open my sector, along with BSNL, say Vodafone came, Idea came, Airtel came, today Jio also has come. So I got choice. So if BSNL is not performing, I will shift because I have choice. And if at all BSNL is not performing, I will call to the customer care center and I will question, ki bhai sahab, I am paying you this much, but my speed is not 30 Mbps, rather it is only 2 Mbps. So I get a voice, and when the reply is not proper, I get an option to exit. So it is the strategy of choice, voice, and exit. So when the market got opened, new players came in, and it is in this phenomena that government also started improving itself to retain the customers. That is how Air India also got developed to a large extent. The Indian Railways started to offer better services in railway stations and in the trains. And you observe certain companies like National Thermal Power Corporation. they fare very well vis-a-vis Tata Power or Reliance Power. Even the Bharat Heavy Electrical Limited, the Coal India Limited, although there are many private coal mining companies, because of competitive bidding and because of private players, government also brought in a lot of technology, and government is now not the sole player, but one of the player. So government sometimes acts as a player and participates and does work, and on the other side, the government has the role of umpiring also, where it is not directly a player. So, for example, there can be a share market where there may be SEBI, IRDA, where we do deregulation work. So, this is how the strength of the state in carrying on the work and in regulation will depend. So, there are again coming back to the basics, the strength of the state and the scope of the state. Now, in the 1990s, when people were facing the balance of payment crisis, etc., it was that time Western countries imposed their notions of structural adjustment programs on the Asian countries and asked countries to reform itself. And in that process, when markets entered, when sectors got liberalized, and many market players came in and started operating as players, what reduced it was not the scope of the state but strength of the state. Why I say this is, it was in that era a phenomena called soft state started emerging. Soft state is not a positive connotation, rather it is a very pejorative connotation. A state which cannot implement the decisions it has taken is called as a soft state, which was given by the famous economist Gunnar Myrdal. So it was Gunnar Myrdal who said many of the states in Africa and Asia are soft states because they take a decision, but they don't implement it because the strength of the state has reduced. And it is in that context, many nations today are not able to face disasters, pandemics, even economic revivals are not happening because of states like Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. These are places where states, the less strength of the state has created havoc. And it is in that context that we have to really realize that there is a lot of difference between deregulation and unregulation. Deregulation may the state is there, it works as an empire. The market cannot operate in a vacuum. So state steps in, establishes the rules, and when there is a dispute between two players in the market, the state comes and resolves. But when the strength of the state decreases, states get corporatized and state acts according to the wish and whimsies of the corporates, and it is that time that the poor people suffer, and it may give rise to subnationalist tendencies, which we have seen in countries like Pakistan, for example, in say Balochistan, where China comes and it has invested in the entire Balochistan region. Balochistan is nearly 40% of Pakistan's geographical area, but only 5% by population. But the subnationalist tendencies are there because Pakistan is not able to implement its will because of the presence of a weak state. So it is in that context that we need to understand that the presence of state in modern day governance is quintessential, and we cannot do without the existence of state. But Mr. Gupta asked a very interesting question: the linkage of state with capitalism, the linkage of government with capitalism. I am using state and government interchangeably because they are two sides of the same coin. Now one needs to understand that why do investments and say enterprises come to South Korea or Singapore or India to China or to America or to Europe. The reason is the capitalism and democracy have a very close linkage. Capitalism to survive needs two things. One is rule of law, and second thing is safety for his investments. And if you observe, that it is in democratic societies, soft authoritarian societies, where the strength of the state is absolute, the state is sovereign. It is at that place the investor feels confident. He comes in, and because of the existence of rule of law, he realizes that if tomorrow there is a dispute between the government and the entity, there is a court to whom he can go and appeal against the government. And because it is a democracy, or because there is an independent judiciary, the court will listen to that entity against the state and pass a judgment that is in with spirit of the rule of law and rules. So it is in that context the state and the capitalists have a very close linkage. Capitalism and democracy are also having very close linkage. If I have to give you some historical context, very few realize that the European imperial expeditions, say Vasco da Gama, who was a sailor. Now, the Europeans had a mercantile way of thinking. The European governments were run by soldiers and sailors and by ships, whereas the Asian countries, China, India, etc., were run by priests, poets, and philosophers. The worldview was quite different. So the Asian cultures and the Asian empires gave a lot of stress for otherworldly thinking, whereas the European societies, because of the mercantile way of thinking, they used their ships, soldiers, and sailors to go to various parts of the world. But now, if you go into history, there was Admiral Zheng He, the Chinese admiral, who built the world's largest ship of that time, the largest ship of the world. And in front of his ship, Vasco da Gama ship was a tiny pot. It was nothing. But the difference was the expeditions of Asian kingdoms were favored and sponsored by taxes. But the European expeditions were sponsored by credits. So it is this mercantile way of thinking that prompted Vasco da Gama to visit hundreds of peoples to sponsor his expedition to India. At last, he visited Spain. The Queen of Spain, Isabella, and the King of Spain, Ferdinand, of that time, they both agreed to sponsor him. And finally, he visited some place. Although he taught it as India, it was the Caribbean region he came to, found the West Indies, and when he found it, he also found gold, silver, tobacco, and sugar for those kingdoms. Those kingdoms could come back here and colonize. And because of this, credits brought discoveries. With discoveries, we had more colonies. With more colonies, the kingdoms could get more profits. Because of profits, trust developed. Because of trust, more credit got ensured. This is how the expeditions also have a capitalist tinge, a mercantile tinge, and the linkage of governments with economy and the state is very much wedded. People today, maybe an Israeli and an Iranian person will not trust each other because of the hostility between Israel and Iran, but he will trust in dollar. So money brought trust. Coins brought trust. And when you ran out of coins, you ran out of trust. So money is in fact the apogee of human tolerance. Apogee means when you have the sun and the moon, the celestial system, you draw an apogee. It is the maximum limit of the human tolerance. Because of trust, you keep tolerating that the other person will bring me something good and good and good. Religion will ask you to believe in something. Say that X is a god and Y is a god. But money will ask us to believe in something because it says that everybody are believing in something, so you also believe in that something. That is the difference between religion and money. So that is how state and capitalism are highly linked. But on the other side, the Europeans were very clear and clever because not every expedition brought them profit, because expeditions can even fail. At that time, they were so intelligent. In fact, to socialize the risk or to communise the risk, they gave rise to a joint stock company, which is a limited company with shareholding patterns. You see how intelligent they are. They brought in a shareholding pattern. So different people invested, and people had confidence that when this fellow goes on expedition, visits a colony, brings profit, and I will become more richer. And hence, new expedition got sponsored. And East India Company or the West India Company was one of that limited joint stock company that colonized the West Indies Company, colonized America, and Dutch was the leader in it because Dutch had a judiciary, a rule of law, and a democratic kind of a soft democracy or a soft authoritarianism because the king allowed merchants to prosper. And I want to say one more interesting anecdote. The Amsterdam in the 16th century and 15th century became the financial mecca of the world. It is still today an entry port where diamonds are being brought and sold. Now, these Dutch people, they went to Americas. They built a colony near the Hudson River, Hudson, and they called it as the New Mecca. In 1664, Britain fought against Dutch on this Hudson River for this New Amsterdam. And British, due to the might of the time with better credit and better weapons, could outsmart the Dutch. And these Britishers called this city of New Amsterdam, established by the Dutch on the Hudson River, as New York, because they could remove it from the clutches of the Dutch. So New Amsterdam became New York. And when British were attacking Dutch to acquire this New Amsterdam on the Hudson River, the Dutch people built a wall to protect themselves. And that wall, after Britishers conquered, when they named it New York, that area where the wall is there became Wall Street. That is how the Wall Street, the financial street of the world, got established by a close linkage of taxes and credit, and better equipments and weapons played a role in the establishment of both New York and Wall Street. So that is how history says that state, capitalism, and democracy has a huge interconnection. They are wedded with each other, and one cannot exist without the other. And today, in the COVID world, the reason why I went to history is because you learn history because to understand what future can be. History without sociology is fruitless, and sociology without history is rootless. So, if we need to understand the society of tomorrow, we need to learn the history of yesterday. And it is that history that is teaching us to face the COVID and the post COVID world. The role of the state cannot be ignored. You can condemn the state, you can defend the state, but you can never ignore the state.
Well said. You can condemn the state, but you can't ignore the state, which is a very important point. Yes.
So now getting into the present situation, I am looking at two things. What state can do now? One, it has to definitely repel the virus by social distancing, by perimeter control, by geographical quarantine. where people at large also cooperate, and we flatten the curve by better spending on the health infrastructure. That is one point. Then we provide relief to the people. For example, I talk about India. We talk about the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, one nation, one ration card that will be rolled out from next year. We are giving LPG free of cost. We are giving 500 rupees to the Jandan accounts. We are giving extra ration for some time. We can even repair MSMEs, because MSMEs, the number of people involved in MSMEs are huge. And we also know that we need to restructure debt for MSMEs. We need to create that crowding in effect. And we need to look at people who never got loans. So that also the state can do. But there is something, the post-COVID world, there is some scope for imagination, where we need to assess what can state do in that imagined world. Because as the great sociologist Eric Hobsbawm, he says that a nation is an imagined community. So you would have never visited Arunachal Pradesh, and I would have never visited Kanyakumari, but because it is an imagined community, we believe Arunachali and Kanyakumari people are our brothers and sisters. It is in this context that I like to talk about the linkage of state with globalization, the linkage of state with democracy, and what can state do to address inequalities in the post-COVID world. Now, with the corona, and that too corona emerging from China, non-trade barriers and protectionism is increasing. We are closing down the world by a domestic government who didn't intimate to the world that there was a pandemic of this order, and they have delayed. So if we analyze and go to the root of the problem and try to fix, it is not globalization. Rather, it is domestic governments, domestic decisions that has created the pandemic. And we as governments, our health systems, we are prepared for good times and not for bad times. And again, as the financial crisis has taught us, as the Spanish flu has taught us, as two world wars have taught us, we need to remember that it is the multilateral organizations, that UN, WHO, WTO, the G7, the G20, that can play an active role. If you take today, why Israel should have a nuclear weapon? It is surrounded by Arab countries. That is the explanation they give. It is surrounded by all Arab countries' hostility. So why didn't a nuclear weapon in the last 60 years was never fired? Why no fire of nuclear weapons happened between USA and USSR, although there are lakhs of nuclear stockpiles in both the countries? Because of multilateralism. Once upon a time, they termed it as MAD. MAD, MAD is mutually aided destruction. But because of multilateralism, these kind of wars were prevented. So we need to understand that it is not due to the intervention of these multilateral organizations, rather the lack of cooperation among these multilateral organizations, that is still not giving a global solution to a global problem. So the better intervention of G7 and G20 countries, when they come and sit across the table, discuss with each other, not talk to each other, but talk with each other. That is when globalization's real nature and shape can be seen in solving global problems. So, in the redefined role of the state, globalization has definitely a role to play, and closing doors to the winds of globalization is also equal to closing our doors to growth and economic prosperity. We need to understand that both survival and revival are today two sides of the same coin. And for survival, the domestic governments will have a role to play. But for revival, we need integrated communitarianism, not the methodological individualism, but integrated communitarianism across the countries to come out of this pandemic. But this COVID world, as we have, I spoke in my earlier thing, that pandemic induced recessions will create supply and demand side problem at the same time. And some sectors get closed like tourism and airlines totally. And some sectors like health will see a boom. We can now witness a new kind of class. Earlier there was an upper class, middle class, lower class. But there can be a new class called the useless class. Because they find themselves irrelevant. Because they have no job for the post-COVID world. So earlier the worker used to fight against exploitation. But today we need to fight against irrelevance, because the skill that he has acquired is today no longer relevant, because the world is dynamically changing. But on the other side, to fight against exploitation, there was an union. There was an Industrial Disputes Act, because there was a concept for job for life. But today, the concept of job for life is dead. The concept of job for life is in fact antediluvian. It is old fashioned, because my father studied one degree, had one profession in his life. But today, I may be doing 6 degrees in 6 professions in one life. Truly that Marxian utopian vision of that communist manifesto, where Marx says that in one life you can be a poet, a teacher, a farmer, a laborer, can come true. So when there is no job for life, there is no union. And when there is no union, there is nobody to fight for you. So you don't fight against exploitation, but you fight against irrelevance. And how to fight against irrelevance? And it is in these times that again state needs to step in for 2 reasons. One, to create a lifelong training module. As times, see, earlier we had subsidized education, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, a skill development program, where from class 1 or say from the pre-nursery time till my class 12th, I get free education. I go to engineering, I get some scholarship or some skill is acquired. But because of this dynamic nature, we never know which sector can get closed and which sector can get opened, which skill can be required today and which skill can be dead tomorrow. In fact, a great man says, the birth of the reader is the death of the author, because the moment the reader reads the author, multiple interpretations come in. So it is in this context, the role of the state in providing a lifelong education facility and the role of the state to provide safety nets to people in these transient times, for people who lose jobs, people who are ahead in the digital race, they may not have the problem, but people who lag in this digital race, in these transient times, the role of the state to provide safety nets. Because the artificial intelligence will create many new jobs, but the job of the government is not to protect jobs. The job of the government is to protect humans. And artificial intelligence, as it creates new modes of work and work styles, the role of the state in protecting humans and retraining, they have to detrain them and retrain them to adapt to the new jobs, and desocialize them and re-socialize them to the new cultures. That will be again the new role of the state. So while globalization will definitely bring horizontal jointedness in the world, while globalization is here to stay, but the impact of artificial intelligence on globalization and then on further on the state may give rise to what the Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari calls biological castes. Earlier, caste was defined by birth, but today there can be a biological caste, because we can say, I need this software in my mind, I need this software in my blood. So this confluence of biological technology and information technology will pose new challenges will give new opportunities. And it is not the confluence of the biology and the information technology that creates problems, but the masters who design them may create problems. And it is where state will again have to step in to regulate the confluence of biological revolution and technological revolution, at the same time take care of the workers. On the other hand, there is democracy also that is in danger. One of the most famous exponent of the world of democracy, Jawaharlal Nehru, says, the democracy may be bad, but other kinds of governance are worse. So it is a choice between bad and worse. The crucifixion of Christ, when Christ was tried for charges in the Roman court, the Pilate judge was presiding over the court. He asks people, do you want to crucify this man? The people say, yes, this man should be crucified, because they felt that Jesus Christ was not the real Son of God. So everybody shouted that Jesus Christ has to be crucified. So we need to remember in this episode that the crucifixion of Christ was definitely democratic, because people wanted it, but it didn't have the tinge of liberty. So what is required is again liberal democracy. Today, we are in a debate who handled it better, whether it is a liberal autocracy or an illiberal democracy. Democracies are there, but they have become illiberal. The democracies prevail with the voice of people, but is the voice of people reflecting the libertarian values that the preamble of the Constitution portrays and encourages? That's a question. So, with lot of charismatic leaders on the world stage at the moment, where they are trying to personalize institutions, there people have a doubt, who did it better? Is it a democratic America or a soft authoritarian state like Singapore? Is it the dictatorship like Saudi and Iran that did well, or is it a illiberal democracy like Tanzania that did well? But the answer lies in democratizing democracy. Democratizing democracy has two things. One is to widen democracy, another is to deepen democracy. We need to listen to voices of the people. At the same time, widening democracy is about the amplification of murmurs. The voices that are lost have to be brought in, consulted, and a bottom-up driven approach and a top-driven approach. The best elements of both have to be combined to sustain democracy, to fight pandemics. Because if democracy is lost, then fighting pandemic will be the China way. And the China way, everybody has experienced it, that the China surveillance states, although it could contain the coronavirus, but people still have their doubts about the numbers, about the second wave of the cases, and the China stock exchange at large. So what we need to again realize is that the role of democracy and the role of state in fighting COVID against becomes very, very important, because without democracy, we get shrouded in secrecy, and it will be the dusk of transparency rather than the dawn of transparency. What we require today is the dawn of transparency and the dusk of opaqueness. So it is in that context again, democracies, sustaining of democratic nations to fight COVID is important. And in that context, the role of state to take democratic decisions, to promote democracy and fight pandemic in a democratic way is also very, very important.
Very interesting perspective, Rajesh. Very nice.
So last but not the least, for 5-7 minutes, I want to dwell on my final thoughts, that The state that we have today, anywhere in the world, across the 190 to 193 nations, this state was the welfare state that we have. Earlier we had a warfare state. Today we have a welfare state. Tomorrow there may be a workfare state, because the job of the government will be to produce more works and more jobs. But this state emerged in the era of industrial revolution to manage a world of steam engine and oil refineries and television sets. But today, is this liberal democracy or the soft autocracies or the communist regimes we have, or the theocratic states like Iran and Saudi Arabia that we have, or we see in Africa, a scramble for Africa, where the African continent is full of lines drawn by bureaucrats at that time. In all these nations, do we think that the state that we have today is capable enough to face the next shocks? Maybe climate change. The climate change also may give us similar risks. So are we ready to adjust to these new demands, to these new shocks, while we are practicing already best steps? The states today also need to invent next steps to face next shocks that we haven't heard. So methods of raising revenues, say for example a tax on information, because if we open a YouTube video and suddenly some advertisement comes, how do you tax this is again a very important concept. And how can states raise taxes and run governments in an era where artificial intelligence will take over both biotechnology and information technology is also a challenge. The liberal democracy we had definitely reconciled the proletariat with the bourgeoisie, the faithful and the atheists, the native and the immigrant. But how will we face the next challenge? The answer to this is not in less state. The answer to this is in effective state. And if I have to give a simple example, in the state of Bihar in 1997, the APMCs, the agriculture producing marketing companies, APMCs, the mandis, where farmers come and sell their produce. Bihar said there will be no APMCs. The state will come out of the APMC. And what they had was chaos. So even to face the next wave of shocks, what we need is an effective and efficient state. It is not about the scope of the state again, but it is about the strength of the state. And we need to realize that both the concept of power will change, soft power and hard power will be mixed to create a concept of real power, where states will have a softer role and a harder role, but states, while acting in their enlightened self-interest, shall also think about the global good, while also taking care about the local needs, as Honorable Prime Minister says very vocally. I can take any questions.
Sure. So, Rajesh, first of all, thanks for excellent inputs on this role of state in this COVID situation. And if you can switch on the camera. And one of the important points which you mentioned is that has the role of the state to increase or decrease in the times of like this, and private sector, or is it can they work together? Is it a look at the concept called PPP, public-private partnership, in which state and the non-state entities collaborate with each other. So, what is your view about A against B or A with B or A plus B is equal to C?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So
So a
your
wonderful
perspective.
question. Yes. A wonderful question. It can be only be asked by a person like Dr. Ravi Gupta. मतलब second, who can think very deep about it. So while we are talking about three P's, I hope I am audible, Dr.
Yes, yes,
Ravi
yes, yes.
Gupta.
You are audible.
Okay.
Very much audible.
So in the redefined role of state, the three P's will become four P's. How? It is not public-private partnership, but it is public-people-private partnership. The inclusion of people into these models will create new forms of democracy. It will be public private partnership. So it will be, sorry, it will be public private people partnership. So from 3 P's, it will be 4 P's. It will not be about, it will just not be about good governance, but it shall be also about good governance and green governance and also gender governance. So the 3G governance. But the question that you have asked, is it A versus B, A and B, or A plus B? The definitive answer should be to provide synergies where 1 plus 1 is not equal to 2, but 1 plus 1 is equal to 11. So what are we doing in it? So as I have said it earlier, the task that we have is state has to understand its scope. Where should the state come in and where should the state regulate? So hotels state need not run, bread state need not produce, but say roads private players will lay on triple P models. State will act as the referee. State will not interfere, but state will intervene. There is a lot of difference between interference and intervention. So intervention comes when there is a vacuum created by the market. Why state will intervene? Because to bring back market on its path. So the job of state will be like that of an elderly man, where he will handhold his children for the optimum allocation of resources in the economy. And at some places, like companies like Coal India Limited, ONGC, NTPC, BHEL, Satluj Jal Vidyut Nigam Limited, right? These kind of companies will also compete with the private sector. One should not forget that companies like NTPC, BHEL, Coal India Limited, these all Mahanavaratnas, has been successful in creating a middle class for this nation. And historically, it has been proved that middle class is the driver of growth. Today, why is Google interested in India? Why is Microsoft interested in India? Why many fintech companies are interested in India? Because although India may be relatively poor with vis-a-vis many European countries, but the middle class of India, the population of middle class of India is more than the population of entire America, who are both rich and poor combined. So our middle class is having that much potential, and it is middle class that creates demand, that consumes, that is the harbinger of modernity. If we see India's freedom struggle, people like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, they all came from middle class families. They were advocates and teachers, and it is the middle class that have that entrepreneurial spirit, that who will visualize the who will visualize the invisible, who will feel the intangible. So it is very important to note that the commanding heights of economy had successfully created a very strong middle class which consume in some state with democracy making the philosophy
some audio issue here. Yes, Rajesh. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So, please carry on.
Yeah, that state shall be a player, state shall be an empire, even an enter, even as an empire, and state shall become a spectator, substance of the government, where democracy is not the shell but the substance. With that philosophy, state will move ahead in creating enabling environments for the markets to perform so that revival and survival will happen.
Some connectivity issue here.
Am I audible?
Actually, we had lost you in the last 1 minute. Actually, there was a gap, so we could not hear you in the last 1 minute at all.
I am able to get you.
Yes. Am I audible to?
Audible now?
Yes.
Very
Okay.
much. Yeah. So finally, what I would say is that state will be an empire, will be a player, and will be a spectator at the same time, performing different roles for different needs, with democracy at the core of the governance.
Sure. Let me ask you a question here, Rajesh.
Yes.
That you have mentioned that state can be an empire, it can be observer. So let me ask you about that in many sectors, state is a regulator and it is also a player. Like look at telecom, look at uh, hotels, look at many other industries in which state, yeah, like BSNL is a operator, and the same ministry also develops regulations for a industry. So many times, or look at airlines, Air India and private sector operators. So many times, people feel that the regulator and operator should be at huge distance, and they should not have a conflict of interest. And many times, private players feel that they are not given a even playing field when the state is also regulating and competing with the private sector operator. So your views on this subject, Rajesh?
Yes. This is again a very important question. So, historically also, there are two kingdoms. One was Dutch and the other was Spain. He would have said, so Dutch fellow got more and the other got. So, so although many places the private players are feeling in that way, but many have gone to the
Activity issue again.
nearly 70 places. the industrialists, the feedback from the entrepreneurs regarding the performance of the state. So I think the license Raj and permit Raj, these words are history. And today there is no red tape, but there is red carpet. So it is not just reformation, but also performance. And it is not the transactions that we do that count, but it is the transformations that we do that count. So today we are not in an analysis of transaction cost analysis, but a transformational relationship analysis. So it is in that perspective that state is acquiring a new shape, new structure, and new substance.
Sure. There is something called the focus has been on the ease of doing business by the government, and some investors feel that India is over-regulated. Like if you look at the Corona situation, that many of the people feel that a lot of investments will happen because people will like to leave China and invest in India. But there is another theory, people saying that many will not come to India but go to Vietnam or Malaysia or somewhere else, because India still has a lot of over-regulation, where there are still a lot of approvals systems which are lengthy, and the power of state is huge. Uh, Like in many of the states, the various laws are so stringent that approvals take a lot of time. So, do you think that uh, the state has to uh, create more trust in the investors, in the business, and give more ease of operations to uh, let the unleash the power of the private sector? Rajesh?
Yes. So, to simplify the situation, the relationship between state and market is like husband and wife. And marriage is inevitable, and marriages are made in heaven. So, in one sector, sometimes the market sits in the front seat and the state sits on the back seat. And in the other sector, the state will be on driver's seat and the market will be on the pillion rider's seat. But the Nobel Prize winning economist Alizina, she talked about the size of a country, size of a nation, in which she gives two parameters called heterogeneity and size. So, in a country like India, with so many opinions, so many dialects, with so many languages, cultures, where that is why we are calling it as the idea of India. We are still calling it a nation in making, a nation in experiment, right? In a country like India, uh, to adjust to demands of each and every consumer is a very daunting task. That is why we are in the era of both competitive and cooperative federalism. The Niti Aayog is ranking states on various indices and preparing a matrix. And the ranking of states is both to name and shame them. And the rankings reflect the state of the state. And this state of the state will be a message to the market and to the investors at large that you can come here and you can get this done. And it is this naming and shaming of states through these indices and matrices that other states are being pushed hard to reform itself. And we know that reform is a continuous process. But at the same time, we very well realize that democracies and the judiciary also pose different challenges in terms of following rules and understanding public voices. So maybe a country like Vietnam or China can bring in a rule and remove a rule very easily. There is a lot of difference between rule of law and rule by law. In rule by law, you want to eliminate something, you create a new law and you eliminate them. So today we can say that there will be no beggars in the city of Delhi by removing all beggars from Delhi by rule by law. But when you have rule of law is a procedure. And in the rule of law, we try to reduce beggary by providing alternative livelihoods. And these things pose challenges. Because as I was saying, how artificial intelligence may wipe out many jobs. In this context, the position of labor laws, the industrial dispute acts, the contract labor act, these kind of issues will be brought in question, and some states may be reforming and performing better than us. But we cannot be left behind. There was always the comparison between the Indian elephant and the Asian cheetah or the Chinese dragon. Thinkers have even said that the India's elephant moves a bit slow, but the imprint it's create by its foot cannot be erased with the sand of the time. So that is India. And some other countries we have seen quick reforms, but many problems because of lack of consultation and cooperation. So
Some connectivity issue here again. I hope that this discussion has been useful in this time. So, Corona, the role of state, how it has evolved historically, how it is changing pre-COVID and during COVID and post-COVID. So, this discussion try to give a context. Rajesh, we had lost you again.
yes. Can you please repeat it?
Yes. No. So I was just like giving a summary to the people so that you had what we had discussed. So I was not raising a question, but your last 1 minute was not audible. So if you can repeat and complete it, that would be nice.
Yeah, so what I was saying was that, say, definitely there is the concept of the Indian elephant and the Asian cheetah and the Chinese dragon. So the elephant may be moving slow, but the imprints it will create with its foot cannot be erased with the sands of time. So it is in that context, India may not be a superpower today, but it is a country with a regional power. But it is a regional power with a global influence. So it is a context that again India will never be ignored. Once upon a time, people used to measure richness with the size of the graves. The Egyptian kings, they had the size of the mummies would reflect their richness. But today, what we are looking is not just wealth, but create happiness. So the growth, uh, not uh, not just growth, but growth which is just. That is what India is looking for. So, uh, as I have said earlier, the challenge is not to protect the jobs, but to protect humans. And when we protect humans, we are looking at a very wide range of possibilities. And I think the present dispensation will definitely balance the people voices and the market demands to create what the founding fathers of the constitution and India have envisaged.
Sure. And last question which I want to ask you is that because of this COVID-19 situation, there is a huge turbulence happening globally and in India and at all levels, and it has given a lot of um, problems for the economy, and there is a lot of economic distress. Uh, Unemployment is increasing. So, how do you see that the situation will evolve in the next 6 months to a year, and will the how do we get back to our earlier better economic situations? So, what are your views on this?
See, I think necessity is the mother of invention. So probably we may be seeing people wearing PPE kits and boarding flights. Maybe the masks will be exploited by the fashion industries. You may get branded masks. So masks may be exploited by the fashion industry. So definitely it will definitely pose for us new challenges and also give us new opportunities. But uh, for the economy, I have a very strong feeling that we will bounce back because, uh, for example, if I talk about India, we have nearly 12 crore migrant people. And if at all these people, when they get back, engage themselves in schemes like Manrega and get themselves involved in asset creating mechanisms, and with government pumping the demand side by giving stimulus packages, I think the economy, I think after 1 year should get back to 5% growth rate, because today, uh, uh, although we are on a very tightrope walk with regard to physical deficit, the government has definitely felt that it will relax the physical deficit. For example, it has already given states the liberty to increase its uh, physical deficit or borrowing capacity by 2% of the GDP, with the condition that they will reform themselves. 0.5% is without the norms, and the other 1.5% with reforms. So it is these kind of steps that will definitely spur demand again in the economy. And one cannot be in hibernation for long. The fatality rate is not huge. China has already opened its Disney park. The flights in America are running. Italy is getting back to work. South Korea and Singapore are back on work. And new models and new structures to work are definitely emerging. Work from home is becoming a new norm. With all these things, definitely demand will be boosted, and the supply chain problems will get eased out in the next 6 months after everybody has faced the crisis, because the even for individual misery, the first 2 to 3 months, the misery looks like definitely unsurmountable, but after a time it plateaus and it drops down and people adjust and get back to work with definitely the new norms. And it is in this spirit I feel the economy will bounce back.
Sure. So, Rajeshi, thanks for a very interesting your this interaction on the role of state, and you have given a historical context to it, economical context to it, political context to it, and how it has evolved over the years, and in this COVID era, how it is evolving and changing every day. Um, Very interesting perspective, and thanks for joining us here. And we are looking forward to more interactions like this with you. So, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद राजेश जी आने के
Thank you
लिए.
very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
and thank you all the audience for joining us here. And if you like this interaction, please like and share this video on YouTube and Facebook, and so that these interesting interaction and ideas reach out to larger number of people and people get benefited out of it. So, namaskar, dhanyawad, namaskar,
Thank you.
thank you.